won't do a double session that day. Seems incredible to believe, but even in the English professional leagues now, some of these individual type decisions are influencing what people do in training on a given day. Now, fortunately, the research that's happened in the last 20 or 30 years enables us to try and inform coaches about what they should be doing in training, rather than them letting all those other factors that we've just talked about influence their decisions. This is a schematic that's been taken from Jens Bangsbo, who clearly has been tremendously instrumental in pushing forward our understanding of the science of football. And we can see that if we focus just on the physiological components of an individual player, we can see that the training prescription is quite complicated. Clearly the game lasts for 90 minutes, and so our players need to have good endurance. So they need to have some elements of aerobic fitness. They also need to be able to sprint, because we talked about those high intensity activities being pretty crucial to match play. They also need to be strong, because certain match specific actions like tackling and jumping require good force development. And they also need to have some ability in repeated sprinting, because a lot of their activity is about trying to reproduce high intensity efforts very quickly without a lot of recovery. And energetically, that's a little bit different from either endurance or sprint based work. So what that means is that we actually need to have quite a complicated physical training prescription for our players. And again, this is taken from Jens Bangsbo's work. So aerobic training shouldn't just be one thing that we prescribe to our players. It should be a number of different types of sessions prescribed at specific times in their training program. So following games, or particularly hard training sessions, we might need to do some recovery type work. We may also at certain times of the season need to focus on the low intensity training to develop specific characteristics of their oxygen transport system. These high intensity training bouts are pretty crucial for those repeated sprint performances that we've talked about. We'll also need to do specific speed training, and we'll also need to do speed endurance work, again to try and improve the ability of our players to perform repeated sprints. So that's a very complicated training prescription. It's much more complicated than we would have, for example, an endurance athlete, or a strength-based athlete, or in some cases a track athlete. So how do we deliver that stimulus? Well, in the UK, again, in the past maybe 20 or 30 years, it was very common to do pre-season fitness training down at the athletics track, and to do what would be called traditional interval work. So that would be to get our athletes to run 4-minute efforts for a certain number of repetitions. Just want you to look at the heart rate graph here, because this will be important for a slide in a moment. This is a representation of an individual's heart rate to one of these track type sessions. So we can see that we've got 6 peaks that correspond to each of the 4-minute efforts. And if we look at the heart rate there, it's a pretty substantial cardiovascular load on our players, around 90% of maximal heart rate. So these are tough sessions. Now, you should be asking me now, well, what has running around the 400 metre track got to do with football? And my view would be, well, exactly, that's a very good point. And the one thing that we have understood in the last 10 or 15 years really is that what we should be doing with our players is not actually running them around an athletic track for their conditioning, but we should actually be getting them to play specific small-sided games and controlling them in a way that enables us to deliver the same physiological stress. So now if we look at this heart rate trace here, again we can see that we've got 6 4-minute efforts, this time not running around the track, this time playing small-sided games. And we can see then that the heart rate traces are very, very different. Different to lower intensity training sessions, but much more representative of that track work that we want to recreate, that's very good for their fitness. So for me, if I've got a group of footballers, why run them round the track when I can use the ball and get the same stimulus and make them more motivated to play? So we know this now, I think, scientifically, and certainly this type of activity is now starting to go into the applied context, and certainly in Europe, to train individuals. They're one-off sessions, but can we actually improve an individual's fitness through this type of work? This is a study that was done in Italy by Franco Impellizzeri's group, and it actually compared those two types of training I've just been talking about. So it compared the running around the track with the actual playing small-sided games. This data is only 4 weeks of training, so not that long a training period. And you can see again we've got these 4-minute intervals at high heart rates. And quite interestingly, both types of training, be it small-sided games or be it normal interval training, increases an individual's VO2 max, so their aerobic fitness. There isn't a difference in the extent to which the type of training increases their VO2 max. So for me, not only will players respond better to playing with the ball, to illustrate that point, and it was a study that we conducted in Liverpool a couple of years ago, looking at the impact of different pitch sizes. Because we believe that if you make the pitch bigger compared to the number of players who are playing in the game, you can either decrease or increase the physiological load. Now, quite interestingly, with these specific pitch dimensions that we use, we didn't see a change in the heart rate responses to our small-sided games. But what we did see is an increase in some of our technical activities. So here we can see the frequency of technical activities in each of these 3 small-sided games. And when we make the pitch very small, we increase the number of tackles and dribbles. So quite clearly then, if we're trying to manipulate the physiological load on players, careful consideration of the playing area can also help us get a technical benefit in our training. So it makes our training very efficient. So for example, if we want to develop a practice that is about defending, then making the playing area small and reducing the play number will increase our number of tackles as well as the physiological strain, which could be important for us ticking our training requirements. The one problem with using small-sided games, though, is that it's very difficult to control the intensity for everyone in the game. And so something that I know Jens Bankbo in Denmark again has done for a number of years, and now we in Liverpool are starting to do some little bits of research on, is trying to develop position-specific training. Now what we've done here then is effectively film the activities of one defender for an entire game. And then we've tried to take out a piece of that defender's activity and recreate it. So here we can see that he'll walk forwards, he'll then sprint in an arc, he'll then walk forwards again, and then he'll do a series of jogging forwards and jogging backwards. He'll walk again, he'll then do some kind of agility type movements, dribbles with the ball, has to take a ball and do a long pass into a target zone. So we're trying to replicate what people do in games on an individual basis rather than trying to do that with small-sided games where the response is very difficult to control for each individual. What this heart rate shows us here over here is the responses to different types of training, including these types of position-specific drills. So the white bars are the position-specific drills, the grey bars are the small-sided games that I've just talked about, and the black bars are the traditional aerobic interval work. Now, again, there isn't very much difference in the heart rates that we see across those 4-minute bouts. So this is just another way that we may be able to simulate training in a more specific way, to try and create variation, but also to make sure that we're training appropriate muscle groups and appropriate energy systems. What I'm going to talk about now really is just a specific problem that I think we face in the UK, though it could be something that's also important for professional football in some of your nations as well.